From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Would you permit a quick observation? It is too easy to say that something that has just happened is historic. It's a word that we kind of throw around too often. But, you know, I was standing in the press box yesterday, literally shoulder to shoulder with what seemed like everybody in Chicago news media in City Hall yesterday. And a funny little thing happened. The guy I happened to be standing next to was John Cass. And at one moment, we both realized that we both had our phones out and were taking pictures of all the cameras everywhere. And we both kind of got a giggle out of that. And then both agreed that neither of us had ever seen that volume of just media hardware all in the City Hall at one time. Probably not even on the night after Harold Washington's death or the replacement of him. Anyway, I bring this up to say what happened and is happening in City Hall today is, if it's not unprecedented, it is certainly something we haven't seen for a long time. Not just that the mayor was pounding the table and saying he was sorry and saying that he was going to fix all this and he was on the verge of tears. We've seen that all before. If you've been around during the Daley administration, that was always the last call, right? It's like pound on the podium, get red in the face, be on the verge of tears and say, I'm going to fix all this, and then everybody forgets about it. But I actually think that this might be something different. And I really recommend reading Conkle today over in DNA Info. Mark Conkle has a very interesting take on this, that Rahm Emanuel could be at a position where he might be able to actually be the mayor who begins to fix some of these long-time horrible problems that we've all lived with in the city of Chicago for as long as we've been alive. Okay, I'm being naive, I know it. I can hear you all laughing now. But at least it's a possibility. There's reason for some kind of optimism. Joining us today, the guy who knows about all of this, my favorite daily newsletter is, of course, Aldertrack, and the publisher is with us today. Congratulations on your new position as publisher.
Thank you. Well, I had it for a while, but now I'm doing it full-time.
Now you're doing it full-time.
Yeah.
Mike Fourcher is joining us today. And Mike, I know that you cover all things City Hall. Am I getting ahead of myself? Is this just overly optimistic?
For Mayor Emanuel to become the agent of change, it's always possible. You know, I'm the son of 4 shrinks, my mother, father, stepmother, and stepfather.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And one of the things that I've learned over the years is to never try to peer into somebody else's psyche. Mm-hmm. You never know what somebody else is going to do. You never know what sort of things are impacting them in order to have them change. Yeah. I think that externally viewing Rahm Emanuel without trying to know his mind, he clearly has not responded to minority communities' needs and concerns as rapidly or with empathy as they would like him to do. And the speed at which that he's responded to things has been slow and oftentimes a step or two behind what minority communities want in a mayor. Will he be able to change that? I don't know. And that has something to do with who he is and what kind of a person he is. And I think we'll find out.
Well, since I have almost a kind of a para-professional analyst at the table, I got to say that one of the things that I mean, we've spent so much time sitting here bashing Mayor Emanuel for red light cameras, for the charter school program. You can go on and on and on. And the thing that seems to be common to it is this idea that he's just kind of tone deaf about things. He just kind of came into office with a couple of principles that he was going to follow, and he just went ahead and did it, despite a lot of evidence to the contrary that this particular kind of thing won't work. And it allowed him to bring into his administration people who were basically yes people and did what he wanted them to do. But he is now so bereft, he is laying so low by what's going on, that one wonders whether it isn't a time for some kind of real introspection and thinking, wow, maybe these things are so awful that I ought to get in there and start fixing them.
Maybe, but I don't really think that that's, I personally don't think that that's the real story. I think the real story is not whether or not the mayor decides to do something. I think the real story is that there is a large portion of Chicago that has become active and is paying very intense attention to every last move of the mayor and of city council. And so there is, in the past, politicians in Chicago, not just Rahm Emanuel, had an ability to be able to say, here's my decision, move on, and then in a few days there was another crisis or another series of things that took everybody's attention. There is a very large portion of the city which is now forcing a micro focus on Rahm Emanuel and all of the city council, especially the Black Caucus and the Latino Caucus.
So true.
So when you talk to a lot of these organizers, and I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks trying to get to know who some of these leaders are. They are young, usually in their 20s, and they are incredibly intelligent, sharp, maybe not necessarily college educated, but they've spent a lot of time doing reading and understanding what the policies are. And so they have an acute awareness of what sort of choices are available to the mayor and the city council. They don't necessarily have an ability to think in terms of a political sense or think in terms of an electoral strategy, which sets them apart from regular politicians, but they are certainly becoming involved in politics. So I think that pressure is changing the way that Chicago is in a big way, and it's changing Chicago's minority politics in a significant way.
For the last 10, 15 years, we've been having this energetic discussion about the media and the future of the media and journalism and everything else. And I know you and I are both people who've been in the middle of that conversation for many, many years. I have a feeling that we've been documenting these changes as they've been coming, that the rise of social media and the interconnectedness of people is kind of replacing the need for reporters in the way that we've seen them before. We've had these conversations many, many times. But I can't help it, I have the feeling that something crystallized in the last couple of weeks in Chicago in a way that will be looked at for 20 years as a moment in time.
I think that's right.
Because what you're talking about is being driven by, and I don't mean to, I'm not degrading what it is that they've done, but it's driven by social media.
Well, I think it's not driven by social media. I think social media is a new kind of glue. These
facilitated by.
Yes, I think that these organizers are, they're very savvy about ways to communicate and find ways to connect and enlarge their group. But they are definitely very interested in traditional media and trying to find ways to connect with traditional media. In fact, a group of organizers this morning, as we speak on Thursday morning, are holding a press conference. And it's the first time that I've seen an organized press conference. They put out a release, they have a time, they have a particular speech. We'll see how that press conference goes. But they're very interested in impacting traditional media and having traditional media hear their message. And they're also very frustrated that they haven't been able to connect with traditional media. And some of that is they don't know how to hold a press conference, they don't know how to connect with reporters. And
that's going to change.
That's definitely going to change.
Quickly.
And that, I think, is also some of the struggle that's going on between the new Black youth organizers and old line people like Reverend Jesse Jackson. One of the things that Reverend Jesse Jackson knows how to do is send out a press release and make sure that reporters will be there and then give a sharp quote that's on point and be there on time. And reporters understand Jesse Jackson's going to give them the quote and it's going to be the thing that they're going to need in order to hit the 5 o'clock news. So this has been a definite struggle, and it's something that is really going on in the organizer community. And I think that we'll see a change in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks.
It's interesting to me to look at the 1967, 1968, in that era, when the baby boomers, my generation, were essentially crowding out the people before them, not only in politics, but in the media, and saying, don't trust anyone over 30 and all the rest of this. But as much as that got joked about, when you look at it with history, there was a social revolution in the way we all communicated, in that a generation, largely because it was so big and so muscular, a generation came in and muscled the generation before it out.
Yes.
And this generation, we baby boomers, have been able, again, by dint of our size, to hold on to this longer than we probably deserved to have. And what we're seeing now in the millennial, this is, I'm positing this idea, what we're seeing in the millennials is another group of people that really are more reflective of the way we were in our 20s, but powered by vastly better equipment and media,
Sure.
able to muscle us off the
Right.
stage. And I guess I'm being a traitor to my generation and saying, well, you're about 10 years late, but I'm glad it's happening now.
Well, I don't think that it's really necessarily just generational. I think it's also that the older generation has a series of things that they have invested in already. So if you take a look at black pastors and you talk to a lot of the reverends, one of the reasons why they're so reluctant to get out in front and to start tearing down the mayor is that a lot of their churches are running city programs, city social service programs that are very valuable for their communities. Mm-hmm. So a couple weeks ago, when Aldertrack reported the story about Mayor Emanuel threatening to take away jobs to pastors if there were violent protests on Black Friday, what those pastors heard was, wow, these social service programs that are valuable to my church and my community could be taken away if I don't satisfy what the mayor needs. And that froze them in place. And in a lot of ways, I think that there is a secondary problem for the mayor, which is that this group of people, which was a good conduit for him to communicate to the African American community, is now frozen and in some ways made irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So this new youth generation is rising up.
Right.
When you talk to reverends and pastors off the record, and you ask them, what do you think of these youth organizers? They say, I can't tell you how proud I am.
Yeah.
This is exactly what it is that we need, and this is exactly what should be happening. Maybe they're on the sidelines, but they are on the sidelines cheering. But
this youth group, or however you want to describe this new generation coming in, is not church-based. I mean, this is something that this is yet another revolution that we're seeing. The power, a couple of white guys talking about the African American community, but I think it's a fair assumption to say that a huge base of power in the African American community has been the churches and the reverends and their political connections to the city. Their power is not ecclesiastical, their power is political. They have been a part of the political structure of the city for as long as it's existed.
100 years.
Today, this new group of African American activists, the young people who are African American, are not coming up through the churches. They are not religious, generally speaking, and they don't have allegiances to these.
Some of them are religious, some of them are pastors, but I think that it has less to do with necessarily a black millennial thing as it is a millennial thing.
Absolutely, I agree.
Which is that younger activists are less interested in existing structures and are more interested in making connections to other people. Mm-hmm. And once you have a personal connection, once you have a discussion, something is able to move on. If you talk to these men and women and you ask them the names of their groups, they'll tell you about organizations that they don't exist on the web. They don't have any kind of structure. So. But I think that'll be very different in a month.
It was most interesting to me. It's not necessarily the most important part of it, but the thing that personifies it is this incident that happened or didn't happen with Reverend Jackson, either having his microphone taken away, or I've heard it told different ways. Maybe they unplugged his amplifier or something. Right. But nevertheless, the symbolism of that, of younger people saying, we didn't come here to pray. Right. We came here to shut this place down.
Well, I think that a lot of hay has been made out of that, and a lot of people have been talking about it, and it's largely because it is Jesse Jackson. But, there are a lot of, I don't think that somebody pulling Jesse Jackson's microphone is necessarily something speaking for the larger group. Mm-hmm. when you speak to these activists, the organizers are largely respectful. They may say, look, I think Jesse Jackson's not speaking for us, but they're not saying that dirty so-and-so, that kind of thing.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting that that's what's happening.
I think the occurrence of somebody pulling the microphone was really just very much a one-off kind of thing. You know, somebody doing something silly that a lot of people have glommed onto.
Yeah.
But it does also speak to the frustration that younger organizers have with they don't necessarily have the tools to be able to connect to the existing media structure.
And I think there's an implicit understanding among the generation that was raised on the iPad that you don't need a big figurehead leader to lead you through. We see it everywhere. I mean, we see it, let's face it, we see it in terrorism, we see it everywhere.
True.
We see it in business.
True.
That flatter organizations with many people doing many things are healthier and survive better than organizations that are led by one charismatic person.
Maybe so, although I think that there is going to be a shaking out. And I think that we're going to learn about, maybe half a dozen or so people who are going to become more recognized voices, more organized, more savvy. I think this morning's press conference is one of those groups of people that are starting to do that. And I think that one of the struggles that people in the mayor's office and other politicians are having is that they don't really have a person to interface with. Who am I supposed to talk to?
But the mayor has been having meetings, though, with youth leaders, right?
Yes, and the group has been changing every time, and he's not exactly sure who to be connecting to, and they're not exactly sure how to conduct themselves and how to talk to them. When I've had conversations with, so last weekend, I called maybe 10 or so different organizers, and I spoke to them, and I said, so, okay, Rahm Emanuel's not going to resign. What's your demand? And, they came up with, well, this and that, and a lot of them were very specific policy proposals. And, one guy said, so we got to have this and that, and we got to have a program in order to do this. And I said, well, so how do you fit that all onto a placard? And he said, well, we got to get a bigger sign. and so, that's really kind of the limitation that you have when you don't have a group of people who are helping to shape and guide the larger movement.
There's one more aspect to this that I really want to get your take on, which is sort of looking across the fence at the police. We have seen what I consider to be very different policing tactics in the last couple of weeks, starting with the Michigan Avenue Black Friday march, where the police appear to be kind of, I won't say accommodating, but sort of strategic. I mean, they're sort of like they're marching along with them, they're seeing where they're going, they're directing the marches to some degree. But then yesterday you're actually seeing the police say, yeah, we couldn't stop them from getting out onto Michigan Avenue. So some people got out onto Michigan Avenue while others were in the financial district and near North.
Yeah.
This is the Chicago Police Department. They can stop anybody from doing anything they want. They're not doing it, and somebody is telling them we're handling these people differently.
Well, so first off, I wasn't out on the streets, and we had one reporter out on the streets for a little bit from Aldertrack, but not very long, so I can't report with a lot of firsthand knowledge about this. But I was spending a lot of time watching Twitter, and Peter Nikias from the Tribune, who's the crime reporter for the Tribune, was live tweeting what he was hearing on the scanner as the protests were going on.
It was great,
which was fascinating. And what I saw as that was going along was that the Chicago Police Department was acutely aware of where the protests were moving and were trying to guide them and provide some sort of structure. I also believe that when the protesters got to North Avenue, the police department then really drew a hard line and would not let them go any further north.
You're not going to get, because that's where you'd get onto Lakeshore Drive or something like that.
Who knows? And so I think that there was actually an effort to try and guide the protesters.
But again, that is a different strategy. Something has changed.
Certainly, and I don't think the police department wants to be in any kind of direct confrontation.
These days, the last thing they need is another 1968 on their hands, right? Yeah,
Or
with the
yeah,
nightsticks.
or Ferguson or anything like that.
Right. So that in itself shows me some kind of an intelligence that's happening somewhere in the administration that we're either not aware of, or I don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but at least there's an awareness going on that I think needs to be credited, because yesterday and the Black Friday thing could have turned into such a black eye for the city if it had turned violent, and it didn't. And I don't mean to say that either of them wanted the violence, but you know, the spark is, you're just walking around with sparks everywhere, and they were diffused.
Well, when I was talking to protesters before Thanksgiving, organizers, I asked them, what's going to happen? And what I heard back was, well, we're telling everybody who's not from Chicago, don't come here. Mm-hmm. We don't want you. Yeah. We're going to take care of this ourselves.
Very interesting point, too.
And,
right.
And the second was, yeah, we're going to protest forcefully, but we're going to do it peacefully. Mm-hmm. And I heard that again and again and again and again. And one of and I haven't been able to talk to the police about their methods and their structures, but what it is that the police department is doing on Michigan Avenue is arguably, from the protesters' perspective, very different from what it is that's happening on 41st and Pulaski.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
So, I think that those are two different worlds, and I think that's a lot of what it is that we're talking about here.
Yeah. So, the obvious question that hangs in the balance here is the future of Rahm Emanuel and whether he's going to make it or not. We were talking earlier about this thing that Carol Maureen, this little bomb that Carol Maureen dropped on everybody last night.
Yeah. So last night, Carol Maureen put out a report after the mayor's speech, after his attempt to turn a corner. She put out a report that said, the mayor's press office knew about the Laquan McDonald video as early as February this year, so 2 months after the shooting, and had discussed whether or not the video should be made public. Now, the emails, according to Marin, don't actually have a decision, but clearly they discussed whether or not it should be public. Mm-hmm. That is, I think, extraordinarily troubling for the Emanuel administration, because part of the thing that part of his strategy with Black and Latino caucus members has been to say, this is the timeline of when I knew about it, and I didn't know about it until late March, early April. Marin's story yesterday calls into question the veracity of Mayor Emanuel's statement to minority members of the city council. Mm-hmm. And I was stunned when I saw it. Because first off, oh my gosh, Rahm Emanuel's team put out a thing that said this is the timeline, mm-hmm. and then Carol Marin has a story that's documented that says no, actually that's not true. But what's even more incredible is that the way that Carol Marin got these documents is that she and Channel 5 had submitted a FOIA request for the documents. Mm-hmm. The Emanuel administration is extremely meticulous and pays close attention to FOIA requests.
Oh, yeah.
So his leadership should have known, I'm certain that they knew, that this FOIA request was out there and Channel 5 had the documents, and yet they continue to move forward with their timeline story.
Yeah. This is one of those times where my 10 years or so working inside the city is valuable, because I know that nothing shocks the central nervous system of the city of Chicago more than a FOIA dropping on a desk anywhere in the system. As soon as a FOIA drops, the FOIA officers are to report all the way up the chain of command. I know because I was one. And it's immediately taken attention to, or paid attention to. And then, of course, you can get as cynical as you want about what happens then. It's like circling the wagons to make sure that it doesn't get out, or that whatever it is. But nobody doesn't know about FOIAs, especially the mayor's press office.
Right.
And so what's even weirder about it is that they apparently gave this to Carol Maureen in the last day or two, which undermines their own efforts. I mean, I just don't understand any of this anymore.
I used to think that I had a good idea of predicting what would come.
Yeah.
I have no idea at this
I mean,
point.
you get the impression, and again, this is just an impression, but you get the impression of an administration that has thrown its hands up and said, this isn't going to work. We cannot hold the barricades anymore. Let's just let it all out. Play all the videos.
Maybe.
Let's get it out there. And maybe some of us will still be standing.
Well, there's that.
Not,
there's that strategy, but also at the same time, there's this other strategy or other reality that they keep trying to have a story that they tell, a structure, and that keeps changing and keeps changing.
Because there is that piece of the central nervous system that's still alive that has the same reaction. It's like, let's come up with a timeline.
Right.
Let's come up with an explanation, an uber explanation for how this all happened. Much like I'm hearing aldermen responding to why they voted for the $5 million. Their argument is exactly the argument they used for the parking deal. It's just kind of like, well, they put this in front of us and it was kind of routine, and maybe I really should have paid more attention, but we do so many of these. Come on,
So so I went to a Southside Town Hall on Tuesday night with 11 aldermen at Liberty Baptist Church in Bronzeville. And
I'm jealous. I wish I could have been there.
Well, it was interesting. Alderman Rod Sawyer, who's the chair of the Black Caucus, stood up and started the explanation where he said, well, the reason why we voted for this is that we were told that this was an egregious case for the city of Chicago. And if we didn't vote on the $5 million package, it could have been much, much more cost for the city. And then he moved on. But what people then started asking was, okay, but you haven't explained why you didn't ask any more questions.
Right.
You haven't explained why it is that you didn't open this. And that is becoming the drumbeat in the African American community, which is $5 million Laquan McDonald blood money. And I think that every alderman, so this was voted on in the last meeting of the last city council before the new term began. Every alderman that is not a freshman, every black alderman that's not a freshman should expect a mail piece in 2019 that says they voted for Laquan McDonald blood money. And I think that this really makes it difficult for a lot of African American aldermen to survive re-election. I really truly believe that this is going to be a major change. And also probably for a number of Latino aldermen as well.
Yeah, as well. So we have other things that we need to talk about. We were just starting to talk about the black aldermen being in trouble. There's some talk about creating a state legislation to allow people to recall the mayor of Chicago, which we haven't had before this. A number of other things that I want to talk about, but let's keep talking though about the black alderman. Sawyer, you mentioned Alderman Sawyer. He said yesterday at City Council in the scrum behind the City Council room, he said, we own this too. He, like the mayor, is also shuffling around trying to figure out how to get in front of this story. And then the Black Caucus actually came up with a list of demands, which I thought was interesting. Number one, no more shooting people in the back.
Yeah, number one, Chicago Police Department shouldn't shoot people in the back. That was pretty devastating.
Yeah, I mean, to hear the leader of the Black Caucus of a major city in the United States, City Council, saying, we call upon our police department to stop shooting people in the back. I mean, just think about that for a minute.
That's pretty devastating, and I think the 7-point plan that the Black Caucus came up with is very thoughtful, and there's a lot of good things that are in there. For instance, suggesting that there needs to be a special prosecutor every time a police officer is involved in a shooting. Currently, the Cook County State's Attorney prosecutes those cases. Another, which is that the task force that was created by the mayor needs to include the current task force created by the mayor is only former prosecutors. It's 4 former prosecutors. So the Black Caucus said, well, hey, you know what? We should have some members of the defense bar that are on this. That's an excellent suggestion. So I think that there's a lot of good things that were in there. But, the pressure that's on black aldermen is intense. And so the Tuesday night meeting that I was talking about at Liberty Baptist, one of the things that happened last week is that Alderman David Moore from Englewood, the 17th Ward, he came up with a resolution that calls for the creation of a committee that would investigate the mayor's office participation in the Laquan McDonald case. When I spoke to aldermen last week, their response was, well, this is a dead letter. It's never going to happen. Nobody wants anything like that.
But that was last week. That was
last week.
An age ago.
Tuesday night, at Tuesday night's meeting at Liberty Baptist, 3 different people during the question time, and the question time was the majority of the meeting, about 2.5 hours worth. 3 different people stood up and said, I want to see a show of hands for all the aldermen here, of the 11 aldermen, who is going to support David Moore's resolution to investigate the mayor's office. The aldermen there at the table were stony silent. They didn't say a word. They didn't answer it. And then this morning, or yesterday morning, Wednesday, I asked aldermen, what do you think of this? Oh, it's never going to happen. But then by that afternoon, there were 9 or 10 black aldermen who had signed on to David Moore's resolution.
And this is a guy who's only been in the city council for a couple of months.
He's a freshman, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
So now all of a sudden there are people who are getting on board with this. And I talked to one alderman who switched, and he said to me, look, we're in a pickle. People are looking at us and they want to see some sort of action, and they don't necessarily trust what's going on with the mayor. What he didn't say is that voters don't necessarily trust the alderman.
Right.
So I think that this is something that I don't know what could happen. I mean, I think it's potential that this committee could actually be created.
You want to talk about unprecedented? The city council investigating the mayor.
They wouldn't necessarily have subpoena power, so who knows what could happen. There's never been anything like this before, but the idea that this sort of thing is actually moving forward is mind-blowing.
Right. And, it brings to mind this whole joke that we've all told for decades of, Chicago is a strong council, weak mayor constitution. So maybe the strong council is going to start being strong. I also wanted to point out that in the Black Caucus thing yesterday, one of the things they called upon that they are demanding is that there be prosecution of officers who lie on their police reports.
That's
which
correct.
is a dramatic thing, and if it came about, it would be, or if it could happen, it would have a huge impact.
So this is something actually that has stymied us a little bit at Aldertrack, which is that Lori Lightfoot, who is the chair of the police board, during her approval hearing last year, which we covered, she made a statement which is police officers should not be lying on the job, and if they provide a false statement, they should be fired. And then she said, quote, there is a rule which is you lie, you die. She actually said this in her confirmation hearing, and yet there has been no forward movement in order to fire these officers. We're kind of wondering what's going on.
Do we actually know that? Do we actually know the status of any of the Laquan McDonald officers other than Van Dyke?
That's actually an excellent point. It's been asked again and again and again, and the mayor and interim superintendent Escalante and Lori Lightfoot, none of them have answered the question.
Right. As recently as yesterday, right?
I think so, yes.
I think the mayor was asked about it yesterday.
And I know that he was asked about it on Monday in his press conference then. And he walked out of the room. There was somebody yelling as he was leaving, what about the officers who lied? And he pulled Escalante out and they left the room.
Yeah.
So, it's a good question, and I don't understand. I mean, there was a statement made by Lori Lightfoot that this would be her policy, and yet there's no clear evidence that it has actually been the case.
Yeah.
And this is the problem that the Emanuel administration continues to have, which is they make a statement about something and then the execution doesn't match the statement.
Yeah. Well, that's often the case in government, I guess. I was going to ask you something about that. Well, anyway, just the question that really is out there right now, of course, is the FOP and what happens with the FOP. Now, they have the Chicago Police Department Union. They have a contract. It's a fairly new contract. Could the city, I mean, this is reminiscent of the parking meter deal, It's sort of like, look, we've got this deal. There's nothing we can do about it. Could the city reopen that contract? Could they go to court? Could they sue to reopen the contract to change some of the provisions that allow for
I don't know. And this is one of the things that has been debated about with the parking meter contract, which is, well, why doesn't the mayor just simply refuse to pay up? Why doesn't he
So sue me. Right.
Yeah, so sue me and go to court? And the argument that Emanuel's people have made with the parking meter deal is, well, we'd lose, and it would be a huge expensive case. Well, who knows, right? And the same goes with the FOP contract. Now, there's also, though, in the case of the FOP contract, the state legislature could pass legislation essentially nullifying it. And I don't know exactly the details of it, but it's my understanding that the state legislature could decide that the city is in error of somehow, or that the labor agreement is incorrect, because the city is essentially a corporation, a body of the state.
But if you go down that road, then the next step is the CTU and
Absolutely right.
AFSCME and every other labor
Absolutely
contract.
Right. Which, by the way, is what Bruce Rauner wants to do. That is a whole nother piece.
Right.
Boy, is it ever. I don't think any labor organization would be happy about it.
No one would support that. Right.
So I'm not sure what the city does about the police union contract. It may be that the police union just says, well, fine.
Maybe we'll let you do this.
Maybe they do that. But it might also be that they decide to sit pretty. I mean, right now, among police, the president of the police board, whose name escapes, or not police board, the president of the union, whose name escapes me, Dean Angelo, is sitting pretty. I mean, because he basically
fairly new in the job.
He negotiated a contract, which two great things happened for the police department. He got an incredible agreement, which made it so that they can't really be investigated and not easily fired. And second, the city of Chicago passed an enormous property tax increase, essentially to pay police pensions.
That's right.
And so all the extra taxes that we're paying are going for the police department that the city has a big problem with.
Well, looking at it the other way, as a citizen of Chicago, maybe we citizens can say, look, we have your back. We just gave you this giant pension thing. We're all paying for this. We support our police department. Now, help us get rid of the ones that need to get rid of.
I think the history of labor, labor unions are essentially, the way they view themselves as negotiating bodies. And that's their chief job. And so to be able to say, we negotiated an incredible deal, oops, we're not going to do it anymore, sort of goes against the basic psyche of a labor union.
I wanted to ask you, there's a thread that runs through all of these conversations, and it's Steve Patton, who is the Corporation Counsel for Chicago. The story that came out the other day, I believe that was also a Conkle story, was of this giant battle that happened between McCarthy and Steve Patton. And McCarthy, according to Conkle, McCarthy really wanted to institute some of these changes in the police department, but ran up against, behind the scenes, pressure from the lawyer who said, no, you can't do that.
I think that's the way that McCarthy sees it. And I think that McCarthy, from what I've been told off the record, is that McCarthy wanted to be able to have considerably broader powers in order to manage the police department. And that's one of the reasons why the SAFER report got shelved, which is part of what Conkle reported yesterday. What's interesting is that on Monday, I think, there was a report in the Newark, New Jersey, or the Newark Star Ledger, which is that day, the city of Newark settled a $250,000 agreement with people who essentially had been bullied by McCarthy while he was in the city of Newark, when he was the police chief there. So there is a history that McCarthy wants full power, total allegiance, complete control over everything. No questions. And I think that there definitely was a struggle within the city about whether or not McCarthy should have those powers.
So when was the moment in your judgment that the mayor decided that he really kind of lost it with McCarthy and he had to let him go? Was it like at that moment? Was it a breaking point like that day or the day before, or did he decide it weeks before?
Okay, well, again, I have no idea what's in the mind of the mayor,
and
I can't, and I don't want to make that judgment because I don't know what it is that he thought. But I will say that I thought the timeline of his firing, McCarthy's firing, was very intriguing. That we chugged through the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it seemed like nothing was going to happen.
And he was actually, again, McCarthy got some praise for the way the police handled that.
And McCarthy actually went Monday morning to go do morning shows, and he was on morning shows.
Right, everywhere,
and
yeah.
Fran Spielman on Monday, so there was going to be a mayoral press conference of some sort that day, and Fran Spielman reported, all of a sudden now when I ask mayoral press about McCarthy and his standing, the response is no comment. And then an hour later there was a press conference announced where they were going to be firing him.
Yeah.
So I think it happened very fast. I think that it happened Sunday evening before Thanksgiving.
That's the impression I have too, but I just can't figure out why. If it happened that quickly, was there something? We can't speculate on this, but
No idea.
was there something that ignited it? Was there some moment that just like, I can't take this anymore, he's got to go? I don't know. No one can know.
I don't think that Rahm Emanuel has ever said, I can't take this anymore.
He's not saying it today.
I don't think he's ever said that.
Yeah. So thank you very much for sticking around for some overtime.
Sure.
Since it's a kind of an elastic thing, I'll just throw it out to you. What haven't we covered that you want to talk about? Do you want to take an extra minute or two? It's all yours.
Well, I think that there's an enormous amount of talk about Rahm Emanuel resign, Rahm Emanuel should be investigated, et cetera. I don't think that Rahm Emanuel's going away. He's going to stick to the end.
Yeah.
That's the kind of guy he is.
Oh, because he couldn't face the family. He couldn't face, sitting around the table with the other guys.
Rahm Emanuel is a former ballet dancer, and I know a little something about ballet dancers. I've known quite a few of them. And one of the things about
You weren't one?
No, I wasn't, but I knew quite a few. And one of the things about ballet dancers is that they train themselves to be able to withstand a great deal amount of physical pain. Because to be able to dance for long periods of time and do the things that they do requires a lot of work and a lot of pain. And that is the kind of man that Rahm Emanuel is that I think that he is able to withstand a great deal of pain. And so I would expect for him to say that he needs to go through all the way to the end. And that would be my guess about his psyche. So what that means is that the city of Chicago is going to have a number of important things that they're going to have to address. Chicago Public Schools is going to need more money.
We haven't even talked about what really is the biggest story.
So how does that happen?
Right.
Chicago Teachers Union is going to strike.
3 days. We're in the middle of the vote now.
It may not be until the fall, but they will strike. There are a series of other city structural problems that need to be addressed with CHA, the Housing Authority, and other things. And all of that requires for some sort of consensus. Right now, we have a city government that is incapable of consensus.
Right.
So I'm not exactly sure how we move through those major significant things in the current state of affairs.
Any day now, something could drop on CPS where it's going to be clear that they're not going to get those multiple hundreds of millions of dollars, and they are literally going to have to go to Forrest Claypool's, Plan A, which is reducing everything by a third. I mean, it could be a disaster of such proportions we just don't even fully understand it. All right, well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for cheering us all up.
All smiles from Mike Fourcher.
Yeah, always smiles from Mike. Mike Fourcher is the publisher of Aldertrack, which is a newsletter that you can subscribe to. And I really like it a lot. That's all I can say about that, but it's a terrific service. And really, I'm so glad to have had you here today, Mike.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, a service of CAN TV. You already know that you can get it by watching this because you're watching it. We know that for a fact. But anyway, watch us every week and go back to this place and pick out the, sit and have a festival of old Chicago Newsroom shows. That would be fun, wouldn't it? We'll be back with another show next week. And I do think we'll have a very interesting conversation because we'll be talking about the Black Star Project, and Philip Jackson will tell us all about what he thinks about the youth movement. And I think that'll be very interesting. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye-bye.